Welcome to today's deep dive. When you step out onto a deck, whether it's like a tiny backyard patio where you drink your morning coffee, or maybe a massive shared balcony in a multi-unit strata, you just expect it to work.
Right.
It's wood, it's vinyl, it's metal, it feels solid, it feels permanent.
Yeah, it creates a very convincing illusion of permanence, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we treat decks like they are just an extension of the ground itself.
Totally.
And we completely forget that they're actually complex, suspended structures. They are fighting this constant battle against gravity and the elements.
But today, we are going to completely shatter that illusion for you. Because that seemingly solid platform might actually be, secretly plotting a catastrophic structural failure right beneath your feet.
It sounds dramatic, but it's very true.
It really is.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to uncover the hidden engineering of decks and balconies. We're pulling insights from a really fascinating guide on coastal deck engineering, specifically looking at the practices of Rain City decks in Port Moody, British Columbia.
Oh, yeah. That region is basically ground zero for this stuff.
Right. It's a region where the climate practically weaponizes water against your home. So whether you're, maintaining a small patio or managing a massive strata complex, this is going to totally change how you look at the structures holding you up.
It really is the perfect testing ground for deck engineering. I mean, a deck isn't just a flat place to put a barbecue. It is an active battleground. And in a coastal environment like Port Moody, nature is just relentless.
Relentless almost feels too mild, honestly. We are talking about a grueling wet season that lasts for 6.5 months.
Yeah.
From early October all the way to late April. I mean, that is over half the year of constant unyielding moisture.
And that duration is the key variable here. Water is remarkably patient.
Oh, for sure.
It doesn't need to break down the front door. It just waits for a tiny microscopic structural vulnerability. That 6.5-month wet season means your deck isn't just getting wet and then drying off the next day.
Right, it doesn't get a break.
Exactly. It is being subjected to sustained moisture retention. The materials rarely get a chance to fully dry out, and that fundamentally changes the physics of how the wood and metal behave.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. A deck in a wet climate is basically like an iceberg.
I like that.
Yeah. What you see on the surface is only 10% of the story. And the 90% hidden underneath is what will actually sink you. You might look out the window, see a perfectly clean vinyl surface, and just assume everything is fine.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, water management is the absolute core of structural integrity. It is the single defining factor of whether a deck lasts 30 years or fails in 5.
Wow. 5 years.
Oh, easily. Because that vinyl layer you see on top isn't just a decorative floor covering. People think it's just, outdoor linoleum.
Right.
But it is a highly engineered waterproof membrane. It acts as a shield. But water has a way of defying our best intentions. It uses capillary action to pull itself upward against gravity, even.
That's wild.
It just finds a microscopic crack in that membrane, or maybe a failed seam where 2 pieces of vinyl overlap.
And once it bypasses that shield, it's not just a little dampness, right? The mechanics of the deck actually start working against it.
Precisely. Because once the moisture's in, it is trapped. It can't evaporate.
Oh, because of the vinyl.
Exactly. The very vinyl membrane that was supposed to keep the rain out is now acting as a lid, holding all that moisture inside.
Like a greenhouse.
Right. It creates a hyperhumid microclimate underneath the vinyl. And that moisture aggressively attacks the substrate.
And just to clarify, the substrate is the heavy plywood layer that forms the actual floor beneath the vinyl, right?
You got it. From there, the water travels horizontally along the joists.
And for anyone who isn't spending their weekends framing houses, the joists are those thick horizontal beams that run underneath the plywood. They give the deck its actual strength.
Exactly. They're the bones of the structure. And as water travels along those bones, it inevitably finds the metal fasteners.
The screws and bolts.
Yeah, the screws, bolts, hangers, the hardware holding the whole thing together. So you end up with structural rot and corroded metal, all of it completely invisible from the top down.
Which brings us to the actual reality of diagnosing this hidden decay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how this plays out in the real world for you at home. A very common scenario is walking out your patio door and noticing a tiny soft spot under your foot.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Just a little spongy area, maybe the size of a dinner plate.
It's the kind of thing that is incredibly easy to rationalize. You think, oh, it's just a quirk of the wood, or maybe the vinyl stretched a bit in the sun.
Hey, hold on. I'm going to push back on this a bit.
Sure.
Let's say I just have a spongy spot the size of a dinner plate. Why can't I just, slap some heavy-duty waterproof tape over it? Or maybe rip up that one little 2-foot section, replace a single piece of plywood, and call it a day.
Right.
A massive structural inspection feels like total overkill for a tiny soft spot.
I hear that exact sentiment all the time. I really do. But let's dismantle the physics of what's actually happening there.
Okay.
If you have a soft spot, you are only looking at the symptom. You haven't found the disease. The disease is the pathway the water took to get there. If you just patch the surface, you are performing a cosmetic fix for a structural problem.
Because the water didn't necessarily enter right at that exact soft spot. It could have traveled from somewhere else.
Exactly. You have to ask, why is that specific spot soft? Often it's because the flashing against the house failed.
And flashing is just that thin sheet of angled metal, right? The part installed where the deck meets the wall of your house, designed to direct water away from the joint.
Right. That's the one. If that flashing fails, or if there is clogged drainage causing water to pool, the water seeps into the wood, it travels until it pools in one area, and then it rots the plywood from the bottom up.
From the bottom up. So by the time it actually feels soft under my foot.
The plywood is already destroyed. It's completely compromised.
Right.
Yeah. A proper diagnostic cannot just look at the surface. A reliable professional has to evaluate the joists, the plywood substrate, and crucially, the ledger connection.
The ledger connection. That's the critical anchor point, isn't it? The heavy board that is physically bolted into the framing of the house itself, like the spine of the deck.
Right. And if water is getting behind the ledger board, it isn't just rotting your deck, it is actively rotting the structural framing of your house.
That sounds incredibly expensive.
It is. So when a contractor actually opens up that tiny soft spot by the patio door, they almost always find moisture spreading far beyond that one spot. They find soaking wet plywood and early fastener corrosion.
Right.
What looked like a $50 patch job is actually a warning sign that the deck's structural integrity is failing.
Which is why taking a photo of a soft spot and asking a guy for a quote is just useless. A reliable quote has to be based on the hidden conditions. You really have to open the patient up to see the extent of the damage.
You do. You really do. And the process for actually repairing that damage has to follow a very strict sequence.
Okay.
It's a 6-step methodology that coastal engineers and specialized contractors rely on, and the order of operations is non-negotiable.
So let's walk through how a professional actually tackles this without just guessing.
Yeah.
Step 1 is obviously the inspection and documentation, right?
Yeah.
Finding those hidden risks with moisture meters and thermal imaging.
Yes, exactly. Mapping the true extent of the water intrusion.
Okay, then step 2 is identifying the cause, figuring out exactly how the water got in before you even think about fixing it.
That is the detective work. Is it a failed vinyl seam? Is it a tear? Or is it a failure of the drip edge?
And a drip edge is that metal lip around the perimeter of the deck, right? The part that forces the water to physically drop off the edge rather than curling back underneath the wood.
Exactly. Water has surface tension, meaning it loves to cling to the underside of materials. A drip edge physically breaks that tension.
Ah, I see.
If that's missing or damaged, water just curls right under and rots the joists from the outside in.
Okay, so once you find the culprit, step 3 is the surgical phase. Removing the damaged materials, tearing out the wet plywood, cutting away the rotting sections of the joists.
Right.
And that naturally leads into step 4, which is repairing the structure and the substrate itself, putting in fresh, dry wood and reinforcing the framing.
And this is the pivot point where amateur repairs usually go terribly, terribly wrong.
Here's where it gets really interesting, folks. Because step 5 is restoring the waterproofing, which means repairing the structure happens before you touch the vinyl membrane.
Yes.
It sounds painfully obvious when we say it out loud. Fix the wood, then put the waterproof cover on. But the temptation to just throw a brand new vinyl surface over slightly questionable damp wood just to get the job done quickly and cheaply must be huge.
Oh, it happens constantly in the industry. You get contractors trying to underbid a job or DIYers trying to save a weekend, and they will replace the vinyl surface without properly excising the rotting joists underneath. When you do that, you are trapping the exact same problem under a shiny new cover. You are literally paying money to seal moisture into the wood so it can rot the deck faster.
It's the illusion of a repair. You've made it look brand new while practically guaranteeing its destruction.
Absolutely.
And we really need to emphasize why step 5, the proper restoration of that waterproof armor, is so critical, especially when we look at elevated decks or balconies that sit directly over living spaces.
Oh, that changes the stakes entirely. If a balcony over a living room leaks, you don't just have a broken deck, you have a catastrophic internal failure.
Right, because gravity is going to pull that water straight down into your drywall, your insulation, your light fixtures.
It becomes a multi-$1,000 interior renovation very, very quickly.
Wow.
That's why things like slope correction are just as vital as patching the vinyl. A deck cannot be perfectly flat. It must be subtly angled so water is constantly directed away from the building envelope.
Makes sense.
Ceiling wall transitions, ensuring the flashing overlaps perfectly. These are tedious, highly technical details, but they are the only things standing between a rainstorm and your living room ceiling.
And finally, step 6 is the final safety review, which actually transitions us perfectly into another major issue here. Because if that ledger board rots, the deck might pull away from the house.
Yes.
But there's a more immediate, localized danger hiding in that exact same rotten wood, the railing posts anchored right into it. We need to pivot from protecting the structure to protecting the people standing on
The
it.
safety guards, yeah. This is where building codes become incredibly strict, and for very good reason.
In British Columbia, the building code mandates that any deck or balcony higher than 600 millimeters above grade must have safety guards installed.
And for context, 600 millimeters is roughly 2 feet.
2 feet. Honestly, when you first hear that, it doesn't sound very high. I mean, people jump off 2-foot ledges all the time.
It might not seem high in the abstract, but the physics of a human fall are unforgiving. A sudden fall backwards off a 2-foot ledge, especially if you land on concrete or landscaping rocks, can cause severe head or spinal injury.
Oh, absolutely.
And of course, that 2-foot rule is just the minimum baseline. Many decks in coastal areas are elevated 10, 20, or even 30 feet in the air, especially in multi-unit strata buildings built on sloped terrain.
Right. And if there is a loose railing on one of those elevated decks, it is immediately flagged as an urgent, life-threatening fall safety concern. Let me give you an analogy for how I'm picturing this.
Go for it.
A loose deck railing is basically like a loose tooth. If your railing is wobbly, the problem isn't just a loose screw in the metal post above the vinyl. The root, the heavy wooden framing buried deep below the post, is likely rotting away.
What's fascinating here is how building codes approach the physics of a railing. The code doesn't just care if a railing looks secure, or if it feels okay when you gently rest your coffee mug on it. It legally requires the ledger boards and the railing post anchors to physically resist specific, quantifiable load forces.
Meaning, it has to withstand the leverage of human weight suddenly crashing into it.
Exactly. Think about a railing post. It's typically 42 inches high. That post acts as a giant lever.
Physics.
When a person trips and falls against the top rail, the force they generate is magnified by that 42-inch lever. It places an immense amount of stress on the base of the post where it connects to the wood.
So if a group of friends are leaning against the rail at a barbecue, the bolts at the bottom are experiencing hundreds of pounds of pulling force.
They are. And this is where the hidden water damage we talked about earlier becomes deadly. If water has seeped into the tiny fastener holes around the base of that railing post, the wood holding those heavy bolts might be entirely rotten.
Oh, man.
So you have this heavy metal lever bolted into wood that essentially has the structural consistency of a wet sponge.
But because the base is wrapped in a pristine vinyl cover, you have absolutely no idea. You can't see the sponge.
It is a physical trap waiting to be sprung. You lean back to take a sip of your drink, the weak anchor point gives way under the leverage, and the entire guardrail fails instantly.
Terrifying.
It is. This is why step 6 of the repair process, that final safety review checking fastener corrosion and guard stability, is never optional. It's the difference between a safe deck and a tragic headline.
That dramatically shifts how you view leaning against a balcony edge, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
So armed with all this technical knowledge about moisture retention, structural leverage, and safety codes, you eventually have to make a financial call about your own deck.
The inevitable homeowner's dilemma. Do we repair or do we replace?
The guidelines draw a very clear boundary here, based on the extent of the damage. You should lean toward repair if the damage is highly localized.
Right.
Say, a patchable tear in the vinyl, or maybe just a couple of joists at the very edge of the deck that got wet, provided the main structure is completely stable. But you must replace if there is widespread rot, if that critical ledger connection to the house is compromised, or if the cost of chasing the rot with piecemeal repairs starts approaching the cost of just doing a full rebuild.
It ultimately becomes an economics equation.
Hmm.
If you're spending 80% of the cost of a brand new deck just to surgically replace rot around an old, tired structure,
Right.
it's a terrible investment.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
You're way better off starting from scratch with modern treated materials and proper flashing.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, when you are actually looking to hire someone? Because my initial instinct, and I think a lot of people's instinct, is to get 3 quotes and just pick the cheapest one.
Sure, it's human nature.
Why is taking the lowest contractor quote potentially a massive financial mistake?
Because of everything we just unpacked regarding the hidden nature of deck failure. A contractor who gives you a rock-bottom price without actually opening up the deck is almost certainly quoting only what they can see on the surface. They are deliberately skipping the crucial moisture testing. They are skipping the structural safety review of the ledger board. They aren't factoring in the labor required to remove the plywood substrate and properly inspect the joists.
Which means they are pricing a cosmetic fix for a structural disease.
Precisely. They will gladly put new vinyl over your wet plywood. You will pay for a cheap fix today, and in 2 or 3 years, when the rot has spread to the house framing, you will pay 10 times that amount for a total structural rebuild.
Ouch.
Or, far worse, you'll be facing liability for a failed railing that injures someone.
And what about the people who want to avoid contractors entirely? The DIY approach. I know a lot of handy people who think, I'll just go down to the hardware store, buy some marine sealant or heavy-duty outdoor tape, and fix this little tear in the vinyl myself.
Oh boy.
The engineering consensus strongly advises against DIY membrane patching. What makes it such a terrible idea?
It comes down to the terrarium effect.
The terrarium effect.
Yeah. When an amateur goes out with a tube of standard caulking and seals up a crack in their deck membrane, they almost always trap the moisture that has already penetrated the layers. They think they are stopping the leak because the top looks sealed, but what they've actually done is essentially create a sealed terrarium of rot.
A terrarium of rot. That is an incredibly vivid image.
Think about the biology of wood rot. Fungi require 3 things to thrive: moisture, oxygen, and warmth.
Okay.
By sealing a damp crack with amateur caulking, you trap the moisture. The sun hits the deck and provides the warmth, and there is just enough oxygen in the wood fibers to feed the fungus. It creates the perfect, humid, enclosed environment for wood rot to accelerate exponentially.
Whereas a professional repair doesn't just trap the moisture.
No, absolutely not. A professional will open the area, use moisture meters to ensure the substrate is entirely dry and structurally sound, and then apply a proper, chemically bonded membrane repair.
And a chemical bond is completely different from caulking, right? Caulking just sits on top of the material like a Band-Aid.
Exactly. Standard caulking eventually dries out, shrinks, and peels away. A chemical bond actually melts the patching material into the existing vinyl membrane. It fuses them together so it becomes one continuous watertight sheet again.
Wow.
DIY fixes on waterproof membranes skip that step and almost always accelerate the destruction of the deck.
It's fascinating how trying to save $100 on sealant can end up costing you a $20,000 rebuild.
It really is.
And to prevent it from ever getting to that point, the recommendation for preventative maintenance is clear. Depth should be inspected every 1 to 2 years. And if you are in an older building or a multi-unit strata complex, it needs to be an annual, rigorous inspection.
Given the environmental realities, especially in a place like Port Moody with a wet season lasting over half the year, an annual inspection isn't just a suggestion, it is simply responsible property management. You have to check the integrity of your armor before the rainy season begins, not after you notice a leak in the living room.
It really is an ongoing siege. So to bring this all together and distill what we've learned today, let's run through the core takeaways.
Let's do it.
First, if you live in a wet coastal climate, your deck is under constant patient attack from moisture. Second, the waterproofing layer is not just an aesthetic choice, it is structural armor. Without it, the bones of the deck die.
Spot on.
Third, if you have damage, you must demand a repair process that diagnoses and fixes the root cause, the hidden structure, before applying a shiny new surface. And finally, never ignore a loose railing, because the lever action of a wobbly post almost always points to a rotting foundation.
Could not have said it better myself.
So, whether you are prepping for your next tense strata council meeting, or you just want to make absolutely sure your backyard oasis is safe for your family's next barbecue, you now have the blueprint to see completely through the surface of your deck. You know how to look for the hidden engineering.
It does change your perspective on the built environment, doesn't it?
It really does.
Which brings to mind a final thought. Next time you step out onto a balcony to enjoy a beautiful view, look down and ask yourself, how much absolute trust do we place in the hidden, invisible engineering of the world around us, and how long has it been since the structures holding you up were truly put to the test?
A lingering question to keep you grounded. That's all for today.